I am Aria Knox, 30 years old, from Mexico, and this is the story of the day I realized love can turn into neglect so quietly. You barely notice it disappearing, until it's gone completely. The morning of my 30th birthday, I woke to sunlight pouring through the curtains and the faint chirp of birds outside. My phone was on my nightstand, silent. No messages, no calls, not even from him. Ethan's side of the bed was cold. I could hear him in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of coffee brewing. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he remembered. When I walked in, I found him sitting at the counter, scrolling through his phone. No balloons, no breakfast in bed, just him yawning and sipping coffee. "Morning," I said softly. He barely looked up. "Morning," my chest tightened. "You're up early." "Big meeting," he mumbled, eyes still on his screen. "Don't wait for me tonight. Might be home late." He walked past me, kissed the top of my head absently, and grabbed his keys. The door closed behind him before I could even say happy birthday to me. I stood there in silence, surrounded by the smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee, realizing that the man I loved didn't even remember the day I was born. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Later that morning, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was unbrushed, eyes tired, but it wasn't the exhaustion that hurt. It was the emptiness. I had spent 5 years building a life with Ethan, sacrificing dreams, friendships, even parts of myself to keep him happy. I'd planned trips, celebrated every promotion, every small victory of his, but he couldn't remember one day that was mine. Still, I tried to be hopeful. "Maybe he's planning something for tonight," I whispered to my reflection. "Maybe this is just part of the surprise." By noon, my friends had started texting. "Lena, happy birthday, love. What are you doing today?" "Me, just relaxing." "Ethan's busy with work." "Lena, again?" "Girl, you deserve a parade." She was right. But admitting that meant facing the truth, that Ethan had stopped seeing me a long time ago. At lunch, I checked my phone again. Nothing. Not even a text. The ache grew heavier, pressing against my ribs like a weight I couldn't shake. By evening, the silence became unbearable. I lit a single candle on a cupcake, pathetic, I know, and sang myself happy birthday. My voice cracked halfway through. Just as I blew out the candle, I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. Ethan walked in, tie loosened, hair messy from the wind. He looked exhausted. I forced a smile. "Hey," he didn't even glance at the cupcake. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," he groaned, tossing his jacket on the couch. Traffic was insane. The client's an idiot, and I still have work to do tonight. I waited. I hoped. I prayed he would notice the faint glow of the candle, the hopeful look in my eyes. He didn't. "Ethan," I whispered, "do you know what today is?" He frowned, confused. "Tuesday?" I swallowed hard. "It's my birthday." The silence that followed was deafening. His eyes widened just a little. "Oh, damn. Aria, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind." He laughed awkwardly. "You know how it is. Work's been crazy." I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, but like glass under too much pressure. "I know how it is," I said quietly. "I just didn't think I'd ever have to compete with your job for a little love." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Come on, don't make a big deal out of it. We'll celebrate this weekend." "This weekend?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You couldn't even say happy birthday this morning," he groaned. "You're overreacting. It's just a day. Just a day." He walked past me, turned on the TV, and settled onto the couch like nothing happened. I stood there, staring at the flickering light, my birthday candle still burning behind me. In that moment, something in me shifted. The woman who had once begged for his attention finally saw herself through a clearer lens. Lonely, forgotten, invisible. That night, as he fell asleep next to me, I turned away from him and whispered into the dark, "Never again." It wasn't just a birthday he forgot, it was me. That was the night I decided I'd stop waiting for him to celebrate me. If he couldn't see my worth, I would show him, one step at a time, what it looked like to lose someone irreplaceable. And one day, when he saw me smiling again, it wouldn't be for him, it would be for someone better. The morning after my forgotten birthday, the world felt heavier. Even the sunlight spilling through the curtains seemed dull, as if it couldn't quite reach me anymore. Ethan was already gone, again. He'd left before sunrise. No note, no kiss goodbye, just silence. The silence had become normal. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee mug, staring at the empty chair across from me. It was funny how something so small, a missed birthday, could unravel everything you'd worked to hold together. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that one day. It was years of quiet neglect, disguised as routine. I looked at the framed photo on the counter. Ethan and I in Tulum, 2 summers ago. His arms around me, his smile genuine. I remembered how he used to look at me like I was the best part of his world. Now he barely looked at me at all. The cracks had been forming for a long time. I had just chosen not to see them. That evening, I tried to talk to him again. I made dinner, his favorite, mole poblano with rice, and waited. When he came home, I forced a smile. "Hey, I made something special." He barely glanced at the table. "Not hungry." I grabbed something with the team. I felt the smile freeze on my face. "Ethan, can we talk for a minute?" He sighed, dropping his briefcase onto the couch. "Aria, I've had a long day." "No, really," I insisted, heart pounding. "You've had long days for months. I need to know what's going on with us." He finally looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" I said softly, "you barely talk to me. You forget things that matter. You act like being home is a chore." He rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking again." "Am I?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because it feels like I'm living with a stranger." He stood there for a long moment, jaw tight. "Maybe you are." The words hit like a slap. He grabbed his phone and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there with a cold dinner and 1,000 questions that would never be answered. Later that night, I heard the soft ping of his phone as he showered. I shouldn't have looked. I told myself that. But curiosity and pain are a dangerous mix. The message glowed on the screen. "Miss you already." "Same time tomorrow?" My chest tightened. My hands went cold. The contact name was hidden under a fake work label. Client M. Cruz. I read it twice, my heart pounding harder each time. He had someone else. I wanted to scream, but instead I sat there in silence, tears falling silently onto my hands. All those nights he came home late, all the sudden meetings, the distance, it all made sense. He wasn't just forgetting me. He was replacing me. The next morning, I couldn't look at him. He kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, murmuring something about a project deadline. I wanted to ask who Monsieur Cruz really was, but my voice refused to come out. Instead, I watched him walk out the door and whispered to myself, "I see you now." For days after that, I played my role. I smiled when he spoke, laughed when expected, but inside I was dying. Every word from him felt hollow. Every touch was rehearsed, and yet I didn't confront him. Not yet, because a small part of me wanted proof. A bigger part of me wanted revenge. Lena noticed first. "You're quiet," she said one afternoon as we sat in her apartment. "And don't say it's work." "I know that face," I sighed. "It's Ethan," she frowned. "What did he do this time?" My voice cracked. "He forgot my birthday." "That's not new," she said gently. "And I think he's cheating," I added, barely above a whisper. Lena's expression hardened. "Aria, you don't deserve that. You've spent years giving him everything. When was the last time he gave you anything real?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That night, I sat in the dark, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. I scrolled through old photos, messages, memories, everything we'd built together. And all I could see was how far we'd fallen. He used to write me notes. He used to surprise me with flowers. Now he barely noticed when I spoke. I thought about the message again. "Miss you already." The way it was written, casual, intimate, confident. Whoever she wasn't new. She was comfortable in his life. And suddenly I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at me, angry for waiting, for hoping, for settling for crumbs when I used to deserve the whole feast. A few days later, Ethan came home late again. I pretended to be asleep as he slipped into bed, the smell of expensive perfume lingering on his shirt. My heart ached, but I didn't cry this time, because that night I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't break. I would rise. Quietly, strategically, completely. And one day soon, he would regret every moment he made me feel small. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection seemed different, calmer, sharper. For the first time in a long time, I saw not the broken woman Ethan left behind, but the one who could rebuild herself without him. I smiled faintly. "You forgot my birthday," I whispered to my reflection. "But I'll make sure you never forget me again." The cracks in our relationship had turned into a fracture beyond repair. But in that break, something powerful began to grow, something unstoppable. And soon, I would let it bloom. The morning began with the same cold silence that had become our language. Ethan was at the table, scrolling through his phone, sipping his coffee like the world outside didn't exist. And maybe, to him, I didn't either. I watched him for a moment from the hallway, wondering when exactly love had turned into routine, and routine into resentment. There was a time when I would have made his coffee, added a spoon of sugar the way he liked, and kissed his cheek before he left. Now I couldn't even look at him without feeling the sting of betrayal burning beneath my ribs. "Morning," I said finally, my voice calm, detached. He looked up briefly. "Morning," he replied, eyes returning to his screen. Not a question, not a glance. Just a word that floated in the air and died there. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him, the sound of the chair scraping against the floor slicing through the silence. I waited for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. And something in me, something fragile and tired, finally broke. "I saw your phone," I said quietly. His head jerked up. "What?" "I saw the message," I continued, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the cup. "From Monsieur Cruz." His expression hardened instantly. "You went through my phone?" "I wasn't looking for anything," I lied, even though we both knew the truth. "But I found something anyway." He leaned back, scoffing. "So you're spying on me now? That's what we've come to?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "What we've come to? Ethan, we got here because you stopped being honest a long time ago." He pushed away from the table, standing up. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, standing too. "You've been lying to me, disappearing for hours and coming home smelling like perfume that isn't mine. Do you even realize how humiliating this is?" He turned toward the window, his shoulders tense. "You always do this, Aria. You twist things. Maybe if you weren't so clingy." I cut him off, my voice rising. "Don't you dare put this on me. I gave you everything, every part of me. And you threw it away for, what, some thrill? Someone new?" He turned then, his face cold. "Maybe I needed something different. Maybe I got tired of walking on eggshells around you." The room went silent. My heart stopped for a beat. That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just froze. I realized then that he didn't love me anymore. He didn't even respect me. The man standing in front of me was a stranger wearing the face of someone I used to know. "Get out," I whispered. He blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Get out." "Aria, don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. You've already left me emotionally. You might as well go physically too." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. but it wasn't the kind of madness he accused me of. It was the kind that comes from being broken too many times and finally realizing you have nothing left to lose. "You're seriously kicking me out?" he asked, half laughing. "I'm reclaiming my home," I said, my voice steady now. "And my peace." He shook his head, grabbed his jacket, and muttered, "Fine. You'll regret this." I watched him leave, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the house. For a long time, I just stood there, surrounded by silence and the faint smell of his cologne, that same one I used to love, now tainted with disgust. When the adrenaline faded, the emptiness hit. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the wall. The reality of it all sank in. The lies, the manipulation, the way he'd made me believe I was the problem. But somewhere deep inside that grief, a spark flickered. For the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was clarity, the kind that burns, but in the best way possible. The next few days were chaos. He called. He texted. Apologies, excuses, promises. "Ethan, you overreacted. We can fix this." "Ethan, it didn't mean anything." "Ethan, you're being dramatic." Each message felt like a trap, the same cycle of guilt and blame. But this time, I didn't reply. I let the silence speak for me. Lena came over one night with wine and takeout. When I told her everything, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged me. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You finally chose yourself." "I don't know what comes next," I admitted. She smiled. "That's the best part. You get to decide." The days turned into weeks. I started sleeping better, eating better, smiling again, even if it was just a little. But healing wasn't linear. Some mornings I woke up missing him, the familiarity, the noise, the illusion. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered the silence of that forgotten birthday, the lies, the way he looked at me like I was the problem. And I reminded myself, I wasn't crazy. I was betrayed. That difference mattered more than anyone could know. One afternoon, while sorting through old photos, I came across a picture of us at the beach. We looked so happy. I stared at it for a long time before finally sliding it into a drawer. Not to erase the past, but to make room for something new, because I was done living small. Done shrinking myself to fit into someone else's shadow. The next time Ethan called, I let it ring. The sound didn't hurt anymore. And as the silence filled the room again, I smiled. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. That was the moment everything changed. Not when he cheated, not when he walked out, but when I finally stopped letting him define me. And from that moment forward, every breath I took, every choice I made, was no longer about him. It was about me. Nights were the hardest. When the world quieted down, and the only sound was the ticking clock on my wall, the weight of everything Ethan had done pressed down on me like a storm. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, my mind replaying every fight, every lie, every dismissive glance that had led me here. I cried quietly at first, not out of weakness, but because I didn't want anyone to hear. Not my neighbors, not my friends, and certainly not Ethan, wherever he was. The tears weren't for him anymore. They were for the version of me I'd lost trying to keep him. Sometimes I'd roll over and reach for the empty space beside me. It was instinct. My body still remembering the shape of someone who no longer deserved to be remembered. That was the cruelest part of healing. Your heart moves slower than your mind. Days blurred into one another. I worked from home, eating meals I barely tasted, avoiding the places that reminded me of us. The little cafe on 5th where we used to have breakfast. The park bench near the bay where he'd once promised me forever. Each time I passed those places, It felt like walking through ghosts. Lena checked in every day. "You holding up?" she'd ask over the phone. "Trying to," I'd say. She offered to stay with me for a few nights, but I refused. I needed to learn to sit with the silence, to face it instead of running from it, because I knew that if I could make peace with the quiet, I could make peace with myself again. One night, it all caught up to me. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by old photo albums and letters Ethan had written me back when love was still real. His handwriting was neat and certain, his words full of promises that had aged poorly. "You're my everything. I'll never hurt you. You're safe with me." I tore the letters into tiny pieces one by one. My hands shook, but it wasn't anger, it was release. With every rip, I felt the weight lift, like each lie was losing its grip on me. I whispered through the tears, "I forgive you." Then I paused and corrected myself. "No, I forgive me. Forgive me for staying too long. Forgive me for believing that love meant enduring pain. Forgive me for forgetting that I was enough long before he ever came into my life." The following weekend, I decided to step outside. The sky was a soft gray, clouds heavy but beautiful. I walked aimlessly through the streets of downtown, my coat pulled tight, the city's hum filling the void inside me. It was strange. The same world that had felt suffocating a week ago now felt alive. When I passed a bakery window, I stopped. Inside, a couple sat across from each other, laughing, holding hands. It should have hurt, but it didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly. Maybe love wasn't the enemy. Maybe I'd just chosen the wrong person to give it to. I went back home that night and wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I've been holding on to a ghost, but I'm done haunting myself. I'm ready to start again, even if it means starting alone. Writing it felt like breathing after being underwater. It wasn't about revenge yet, not the kind that hurts someone else. It was about reclaiming what he'd taken, my peace, my joy, my identity. And I realized something profound. Sometimes, the first act of revenge is simply choosing to live well when someone expected you to fall apart. Weeks passed. Ethan stopped calling eventually. I think he realized his apologies weren't landing anymore. Maybe the other woman filled whatever void he thought existed. Maybe she'd learn, like I did, that some men mistake control for love. But one evening, as I scrolled through social media, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Ethan had posted a picture. Him and her, at the same cafe where we used to have breakfast. Same table. Same smile. The caption read, "Finally found peace." I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was pain, sharp, immediate. But it faded quickly, replaced by something colder. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to see it. To hurt, I closed the app. "No," I whispered. "Not this time." That night, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker below. The world looked endless again, full of possibilities that had nothing to do with him. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Ethan. I was thinking about me, the woman who'd been silenced, forgotten, underestimated, and yet still standing. Maybe my story wasn't over. Maybe this was just the middle, the part where the heroine rebuilds before she rises. And when I rose, I promised myself it wouldn't be quiet. I wiped my tears and looked up at the night sky, whispering into the wind. "You forgot my birthday. You forgot my worth. But soon you'll remember my name." The stars blinked back, silent witnesses to a vow that burned like fire in my chest. Because the next time Ethan saw me, it wouldn't be as the woman he broke. It would be as the woman he could never touch again. The shift began quietly, like the first breeze before a storm. There wasn't one defining moment when I decided I would take back my life. It was a series of small awakenings. Each morning, the sun seemed a little brighter, the silence a little less painful. I started running again. The first day, I could barely last 10 minutes before my lungs burned, but I pushed through. Each step pounded out the echoes of Ethan's words, the ones that made me feel small. "You're too emotional. You're too much. You'll never make it on your own." Every stride was a rebellion. Every drop of sweat was proof that I was still alive. Still me a few weeks later, I sat in my apartment surrounded by sketches and mood boards. Before Ethan, I used to design clothes. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my passion. I'd stopped years ago because he called it a distraction. But now, looking at the colors, the fabric samples, the patterns spread across the table, I felt something ignite inside me, the spark I'd buried under years of compromise. I picked up a pencil and began to draw. My hand moved instinctively, tracing lines that flowed like emotion on paper. Each design told a story, not of pain, but of rebirth. The first piece I finished was a dress, elegant, strong, unapologetically bold. I called it resilience. For hours I worked in silence, and for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt sacred. Lena came by one afternoon and froze when she saw the sketches scattered everywhere. "Oh my God," she whispered, eyes wide. "You're back," I laughed softly. "Back?" she grinned. "This you, the artist, the dreamer, the woman who made people stop and stare." I felt my chest tighten with emotion. I forgot how much I loved it, I admitted. Lena leaned against the table, studying one of the designs. "You should show these. Start again. Make something out of this." The thought scared me. "It's been years, Lena. Who would care about my work now?" She smiled knowingly. "The right people always do. You just have to remind them you exist." Her words stuck with me. That night, I lay awake thinking about what she said. Maybe starting over didn't mean going back to who I was before Ethan. Maybe it meant becoming someone new. Someone stronger. The next morning, I applied for a spot at a local fashion showcase. It was a small event, but it was something. When I got the acceptance email, I cried. Not because it was the biggest thing I'd ever achieved, but because I'd finally chosen myself. The following weeks were a blur of fabric, late nights, and endless coffee. I poured everything into my designs. Every heartbreak, every moment of strength, every tear shed in the dark. I stopped thinking about Ethan completely. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because he no longer mattered. Then one afternoon, as I was finishing a hemline, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. For a second, my stomach twisted. Muscle memory. But then I exhaled slowly and ignored the call. He tried again. And again. Finally, a message came through. Ethan. "Hey, Aria. Been thinking about you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked my phone and went back to sewing. The old me would have answered, would have listened, would have hoped. But this version of me, the one rising from the ashes, didn't have time for ghosts. When showcase night finally arrived, I stood backstage, my hands trembling as I adjusted the fabric on my models. The music thumped, lights shimmered, and the audience buzzed with excitement. "Aria, you ready?" one of the coordinators asked. I nodded, heart pounding. More than ever. As the first model stepped onto the runway wearing my design, I held my breath. The spotlight hit her, illuminating every curve, every line, every detail that came from the pieces of my broken heart. The audience gasped. Then they clapped. Then they cheered. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I stood there, letting the sound wash over me. It wasn't just applause. It was validation. It was proof that I had built something beautiful from the ruins. After the show, people came up to me, photographers, bloggers, other designers. They asked about my inspiration, my story, and for the first time I told it without shame. "I was invisible for a long time," I said simply. "Now I'm not." Lena hugged me tightly afterward. "You did it," she whispered. "He doesn't even deserve to know what he lost." I smiled faintly. "Oh, he'll know, eventually." A week later, an article was published about the showcase. My name was there, Aria Knox, the designer to watch. Ethan saw it. I knew he did, because another message came through that night. "Ethan, I saw your show. You looked incredible. I'm proud of you." I stared at the words for a long time. Once they would have meant everything to me. Now they meant nothing. I typed a reply, paused, then deleted it. Instead, I took a photo of one of my designs, the resilience dress, and posted it on social media with the caption, "To the ones who forgot my worth, Thank you. You reminded me to find it myself. The post went viral overnight. Comments poured in from women who'd been broken, belittled, betrayed, all saying the same thing. You gave me hope. That was the real victory. Not the show. Not the applause. But knowing my pain had become someone else's strength. That night, I stood before the mirror and whispered, "You did it." Not to spite him. Not to prove anything, but because I finally believed it myself. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. She was whole, forged by fire, sharper than ever, ready for whatever came next. And as I turned off the light, I knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't over. It was just starting to get good. After the showcase, life began to shift again, not as violently as before, but in quiet, deliberate ways. My phone buzzed constantly now. New opportunities, collaborations, messages from people who wanted to work with me. The woman who had once been invisible in her own relationship was now being seen by the world. But I wasn't done yet. Because success wasn't just about healing. It was about showing Ethan, and everyone like him, that underestimating me had been their greatest mistake. A week after the show, I received an invitation to a charity gala. It wasn't just any event. It was one Ethan's company sponsored every year. The same event he'd taken her to last time. I remembered the photos, their polished smiles, his hand resting on her back as they posed for cameras. I hadn't been invited that year. He'd told me it was too formal, that he needed to keep things professional. I'd believed him. Now, things were different. The invitation read, "We would be honored to have designer Aria Knox attend our annual charity gala." I smiled, a slow, burning smile that reached deep into the part of me that had been waiting for this moment. He would see me again. Not as the woman he'd left behind, but as the woman he could never have again. Lena was the first to notice the glint in my eyes. "Oh no," she said, sipping her wine. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The revenge look," she teased. "What are you planning?" "Nothing," I said innocently, flipping through my sketchbook. Then with a smirk, "Just thinking about what to wear." She laughed. "Oh, I can't wait to see his face." Neither could I. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I worked on a new collection. Sleek, fierce, unapologetic. I called it Rebirth. It wasn't just fashion, it was armor. The night before the event, I stood in front of my mirror wearing the final piece I'd designed for myself. A deep crimson gown that flowed like fire, the fabric shimmering with every movement. It was bold, commanding, everything I'd once been afraid to be. "Perfect," I whispered to my reflection. This wasn't about flaunting success or proving a point. It was about closure, poetic, visual, undeniable. The night of the gala arrived. The venue was a glass-walled masterpiece overlooking the city, sparkling under the glow of chandeliers. As I stepped out of the car, cameras flashed, and for a moment, I felt like the universe was holding its breath. "Miss Knox, over here," one photographer called out. "Love the dress." I smiled politely, posing for a few shots. Inside, I could feel my heart pounding, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. And then I saw him. Ethan stood near the bar, a glass in hand, his tie loosened in that casual arrogance I used to find charming. She was beside him. Mara, the woman from the texts, the one who had unknowingly become the final push I needed to rise. For a brief second, his gaze swept the room and landed on me. He froze, our eyes locked. The color drained from his face, replaced by something almost satisfying. Disbelief, regret, and a flicker of shame. I didn't look away. I walked past him, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the red of my dress trailing behind me like a declaration. Lena leaned over as we found our table. "You could have knocked him over with a feather." "Good," I said softly, sipping my champagne. "I hope he's standing close to the edge." Throughout the night, I could feel his eyes on me. Every time I laughed, every time someone came up to compliment my work, every time I stood in the light, he watched. It wasn't about seduction. It was about reclaiming my power, the very power he'd chipped away at for years. When he finally gathered the courage to approach, I didn't look surprised. "Aria," he said quietly, voice tight. "You look amazing," I smiled, cool and composed. "Thank you, Ethan. I didn't know you'd be here." "Of course not," I said lightly. "You never paid attention to where I went." He flinched, and I saw the memory of his cruelty flicker behind his eyes. "Listen, I've been meaning to—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Not tonight. This isn't your stage anymore." He hesitated, glancing around as if realizing for the first time how the world saw me now. Successful, poised, untouchable. "You've changed," he murmured. "No," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "I just stopped dimming my light for someone who preferred the dark." Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, drowning in the same silence he once forced me to live in. Later that evening, a journalist approached me for an interview. "Your designs are everywhere right now," she said. "What inspired this collection?" I smiled, eyes flicking briefly toward Ethan across the room. "Pain," I said simply, "and the decision to never let it define me again." She nodded, scribbling notes, unaware of the man standing in the shadows behind her, the one who finally understood what losing me really meant. As the night ended, I stepped out into the cool air, the city lights reflecting off the glass of the venue behind me. My phone buzzed again. "Ethan. One last time. Ethan. I shouldn't have let you go." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a deep breath, letting the night air fill my lungs. I had done what I came to do. I'd faced the man who broke me. Not with anger, not with tears, but with quiet strength. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation, and I had transformed, completely. When I woke the next morning, the satisfaction from the gala still lingered in my chest like a quiet ember. I had walked into that room as the woman Ethan once dismissed, and walked out as someone untouchable. But deep down I knew one night wasn't enough. He had taken so much from me. My time, my peace, my sense of worth. I didn't just want him to regret losing me. I wanted him to feel the consequences of underestimating me. And for that, I needed to do more than show up looking beautiful. I needed to win, in every way that counted. Over the following weeks, I focused all my energy on expanding my brand. The response to my Rebirth collection had been overwhelming. Designers wanted to collaborate, investors wanted to meet, and boutiques wanted to feature my work. It was exhilarating, but it was also strategic, because one of those boutiques happened to be the same one where Ethan's company had just signed a marketing contract. Fate, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. When the store reached out asking if I'd design their exclusive new campaign wardrobe, I didn't hesitate. I said yes, and I made sure Ethan's firm would be there on launch day. The morning of the event, I arrived early to prepare. My team buzzed around me, arranging mannequins, adjusting displays, perfecting every thread. The boutique sparkled, gold accents, mirrored walls, the air thick with the scent of luxury. "This is it," Lena whispered, her grin wicked. "He's going to walk in here and choke on his own ego." I laughed softly. "He already is," I said, fastening my necklace. "He just doesn't know it yet." By noon, the boutique was full. Reporters, stylists, photographers, and of course the marketing team from Ethan's company. I saw him the moment he walked in, looking lost among people who now greeted me first. He froze when he saw my designs on display. Strong silhouettes, rich colors, unapologetically bold. Women stopped to touch the fabric, to take pictures. I watched him watching me, and it was like watching a man realize too late that he'd gambled away something priceless. He approached me slowly, hesitantly this time. "Aria," he began, his voice softer than I remembered. "Your work, it's incredible." "Thank you," I said calmly, not looking up from the model's adjustments. "I didn't realize—" "Of course you didn't," I said, cutting him off. "You never paid attention to what I was capable of." He exhaled sharply. "I deserve that." I turned to him, meeting his eyes for the first time. "You deserve a lot more than that, Ethan. But I'm not in the business of revenge. I'm in the business of creating beauty, something you clearly never understood." He looked around the room, as if seeing it all for the first time. The attention, the success, the people who now surrounded me with admiration. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The woman he once called too emotional was now being praised for the same passion he'd mocked. "You've changed," he said finally. "No," I replied, my tone steady. "I just stopped letting you define me." He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake." I tilted my head. "No, Ethan, you made a choice. And I made one too, to never be small again." The event went flawlessly. Cameras flashed, articles were written, and by the end of the night, I was signing new deals that would solidify my career for years to come. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, I sat on one of the velvet benches, exhaustion mixing with pride. Lena joined me, kicking off her heels. "You did it," she said, grinning. "You made him watch you shine," I smiled. It wasn't even about him anymore. It was about remembering who I was before he made me forget. Later that evening, when I checked my messages, one caught my attention. It was from an unknown number, but I recognized his tone instantly. "Ethan." "I keep thinking about what you said. About choices. I was wrong, Aria. I see that now. If you'd ever consider talking again..." I deleted it without reading the rest. The past didn't deserve space in my present. A week later, I was invited to speak at a women's business summit. The topic: reclaiming yourself after being undervalued. Standing on that stage, looking out at a room full of women who had their own scars, I felt the gravity of my journey hit me. "I once thought losing someone meant losing myself," I said, my voice strong but calm. "But sometimes, the greatest heartbreak is just the universe clearing the way for who we're meant to become." Applause filled the room. I saw tears in the audience, not of pity, but of recognition, because they understood. They'd lived it too. After the talk, a woman approached me, an elegant, poised, and nervous Ms. Knox. She said softly, "I work with your ex's firm. I just wanted to say your story inspired me. I'm leaving next week. I deserve better." I smiled. "You do, and don't ever forget it." It was then I realized the full circle of it all. Ethan had tried to silence me, to make me small, to convince me I couldn't stand on my own. And now, because of my voice, someone else had found theirs. That was the real strike. Not the dress. Not the fame. Not even the moment he looked at me and saw what he lost. The real revenge was impact. The ripple effect of strength that reached beyond me. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window. The city shimmered below, alive and loud, and I whispered to myself, "This is what power feels like." I wasn't the girl who cried over forgotten birthdays anymore. I wasn't the woman who begged to be seen. I was Aria Knox, and the world was finally watching. By the time the article about my collection hit the industry magazines, I was already on to my next project. It wasn't about chasing fame, it was about momentum. Every design, every photo shoot, every interview pushed me further from the woman Ethan once tried to break. But fate had a twisted sense of drama. The article that celebrated my rise also featured a quote from someone unexpected, Ethan's company's CEO, praising the refreshing direction of the collaboration between my brand and their marketing team. He had no idea I was the designer behind it. Not until reporters connected the dots. And when they did, everything blew up. It started with an online post, a fashion blogger pointing out the irony of my comeback story being linked to my ex's firm. Within hours, social media erupted. Comments flooded in. Poetic justice. Imagine having to market your ex's success. He must be kicking himself. By evening, my name was trending. Ethan's too, but for all the wrong reasons. The next day, his company's PR team reached out, asking for a joint statement to control the narrative. I laughed out loud when I read it. Control? The man who'd spent years controlling me now wanted to manage my story? I declined politely. Then, instead, I accepted an invitation for a live interview with one of the city's biggest fashion networks. The producer told me, "We want to talk about resilience, how you turned heartbreak into triumph." Perfect. The day of the interview, I sat in the green room, smoothing the folds of my white silk dress. The host came in smiling warmly. "You ready, Aria?" "More than ready," I said, heart calm, voice steady. When the cameras rolled, she began gently. "You've become an inspiration to so many women. How did you stay strong after such public heartbreak?" I smiled faintly, by remembering that I was the main character of my story, not the villain someone else made me out to be. She nodded. "Your ex's company has been under some pressure since the collaboration went viral. Do you have anything you'd like to say to him?" The studio fell silent. I could feel the tension. The question everyone wanted answered. I took a slow breath and met the camera. "I don't need to say anything to him. My success already did." The audience clapped. Online, the clip spread like wildfire. Later that night, I got a call from the CEO of the firm. Not Ethan, but his boss. "Ms. Knox," he began, awkwardly polite. "I wanted to apologize personally for the situation. We weren't aware of your connection to Mr. Carter when we contracted your line." "That's all right," I replied. "You made a good business decision. I hope you'll continue to support female designers." "We intend to," he said quickly. "And for what it's worth, your work has done wonders for our brand image." I smiled. "I suppose it's about time you learned what real creativity looks like." After that call, Ethan's name quietly disappeared from the company's online bio. Rumor had it he was taking time off. Translation: they'd let him go to protect their image. It was poetic. The man who once claimed I was bad for his reputation, now losing his own because of mine. A few days later, I got a message from Mara. Yes, that Mara. The woman he cheated with, Mara. I just wanted to say, I didn't know the full story back then. I'm sorry for what happened. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Me. You don't owe me anything. We both learned who he really was." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was release. I had no hatred left in me, only peace. My following grew faster than I could keep up with. People connected to my story, not just my fashion. They saw themselves in my struggle, in my rise, and I made sure to use that platform for something bigger, launching a mentorship program for young designers, especially women who'd been told they weren't good enough. It felt right. It felt full circle. One of the first workshops I held was called From Broken to Brilliant. Standing in front of those aspiring artists, I said, "People will try to define you by your mistakes, or by theirs. Don't let them. You have the power to rewrite the story anytime you want." They clapped, and I saw hope in their eyes, the kind I once thought I'd lost forever. Weeks later, at another gala, I crossed paths with Ethan again. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. He wasn't the confident, charming man who once towered over me. "Aria," he said softly when our eyes met. "I wanted to congratulate you. Everything you've done, it's amazing. Thank you," I said coolly. He hesitated. "I lost everything after the scandal. The company, I know," I interrupted gently. "But you didn't lose everything, Ethan. You still have the chance to be better. Start over, without hurting anyone this time." He nodded, looking ashamed. "You really have changed." "No," I said again, just as I had months before. "I just finally started living without fear." And with that, I turned away, walking toward the crowd of people waiting to greet me. A woman no longer defined by what she'd endured, but by what she'd become. That night, I stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered like gold dust against the dark. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who cried in silence, who begged for love, who believed she wasn't enough. She deserved this view. I whispered into the wind, "You made it." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The storm had finally passed. Not with thunder or lightning, but with a steady, cleansing quiet that wrapped around my life like sunrise after a long, merciless night. For the first time in years, my days didn't revolve around proving myself or healing from what was done to me. I was simply living. The fame from the interview had opened more doors than I ever imagined. I was traveling, collaborating, mentoring, thriving. But beneath the spotlight, I had found something even more precious. Peace. One afternoon, as I packed for a trip to Milan, I found an old sketchbook at the back of my closet. Its corners were frayed, its pages yellowing, filled with doodles I'd made when I first dreamed of becoming a designer. There were drawings of dresses, shoes, ideas for collections, all signed Aria Knox, long before the world knew that name. I smiled faintly. Those pages held the pure version of me, untouched by heartbreak, unbothered by betrayal. For a long moment, I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the pages. My eyes fell on a half-finished sketch titled Promise. It was supposed to be a wedding gown I'd once imagined designing for my future. But I had never finished it. Back then, I thought that dream was gone forever. Now, I realized it wasn't about the wedding. It was about the promise to myself. That night, I went out for a walk through the city, the same streets where Ethan and I once argued, where I once cried in silence. But this time the air felt different. Lighter. A young woman stopped me at a crosswalk. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "Are you Aria Knox?" I nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her eyes bright. "I saw your interview. You helped me leave someone who made me feel small. I'm studying design now." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "I'm proud of you," I told her. "Keep going. You're building something stronger than love. You're building you." She smiled, and as she walked away, I realized that what I'd built was bigger than a brand. It was a voice, a movement, a reminder that women who are broken don't stay broken. They rebuild themselves into something unshakable. Weeks later, I attended another fashion summit, this time not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker. The theme was redefining power. As I walked on stage, applause filled the hall. I took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of faces, and said, "Power isn't loud. It's not about revenge or validation or proving anyone wrong. Real power is the quiet certainty that you were always enough, even when they couldn't see it." There was a hush in the crowd, followed by an eruption of claps, and in that moment I felt it again. That spark. That warmth in my chest that told me I'd finally become everything I once needed. Later, after the summit, I returned to my hotel room to find a letter slipped under the door. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was Ethan's. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity, or maybe compassion, got the better of me. It read, "Aria, I watched your speech today. I know I don't deserve to write this, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for who I was back then. A man too insecure to see your light without feeling threatened by it. You were never too much. I was too little. I hope life gives you everything I took away. Ethan." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder, a symbol that closure doesn't always come from hearing sorry. It comes from no longer needing it. Months passed. My designs were featured in Paris, my mentorship program was expanding, and I was busier than ever. Yet despite the chaos, I found a rhythm. One that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. Sometimes I still thought about the woman I used to be. The one who stayed up late waiting for texts that never came, who questioned her worth because of someone else's silence. I wished I could tell her that everything she was losing back then was just clearing space for everything she deserved. And in a way, I already had. Through every speech, every design, every woman who looked at me and saw hope, I was talking to her too. One evening, Lena and I sat on my apartment balcony, wine glasses in hand, watching the sunset paint the city gold. "You ever think you'd come this far?" she asked. "Not in the beginning," I admitted. "I just wanted the pain to stop. I didn't think about what could grow from it." She smiled. "You turned ashes into art, Aria. That's rare." I laughed softly. "Or stubborn," I said. "Maybe both." We clinked glasses. The air was warm. The world felt still. And for the first time, there was no bitterness left. Only gratitude. Because even though Ethan had been the storm, he had also been the reason I learned how to build shelter. As the night deepened, I walked to my studio and pulled out that unfinished sketch. Promise. I placed it on my desk and began to draw again. This time, not a wedding dress, but a gown that symbolized rebirth. Strong lines, flowing fabric, intricate details that told a story of breaking free. When I finished, I titled it Unbroken. I smiled, whispering to myself, "You kept your promise." The next morning, I hung the sketch on my wall, not for sale, not for display, but as a piece of me. A reminder that I didn't just survive him. I outgrew the version of myself that needed him. That was the real victory. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's peace. It's waking up one day and realizing you don't need to look back anymore. You've already won. The morning light spilled through the window, soft and golden, as I stood in front of the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, not because of how I looked, but because of how I felt. There was a peace there, deep and quiet, that I once believed I'd never find again. I had come so far from the girl who cried over broken promises. So far from the woman who begged for love from someone incapable of giving it. The road had been long, brutal at times, but it had led me here, to wholeness, to purpose, to freedom. That day marked the 1-year anniversary of my collection's launch, the moment everything had changed. My team had planned a private dinner at the rooftop restaurant where it all began. It wasn't about publicity this time. It was about gratitude. When I arrived, the air was cool, the skyline glowing under a pink sky. My friends and colleagues greeted me with laughter and hugs. Lena handed me a glass of champagne. "To us," she said. "To every woman who decided she was enough." We toasted, and for the first time in a long time, the clinking of glasses didn't remind me of what I'd lost, only what I'd built. After dinner, as the others danced and talked, I slipped away to the edge of the terrace, gazing down at the city lights. New York had always felt too big, too loud, too unforgiving, but tonight it felt like mine. Every street below held a memory of pain, of growth, of becoming. Lena joined me quietly. "You thinking about him?" she asked softly. I smiled. "Not really. More about her." "Her? The girl I used to be? The one who didn't know her worth?" She nodded knowingly. "You've honored her well." "I hope so," I whispered. We stood there in silence, the wind wrapping around us, carrying away whatever remnants of the past still lingered. A week later, I received an invitation that made me pause. The Global Design Awards. My brand had been nominated for Designer of the Year. I stared at the email in disbelief. It was the recognition every designer dreamed of, but to me, it meant something deeper. It was the universe whispering, "You did it." The ceremony was a blur of flashbulbs and applause. When they announced my name, my heart stuttered. I walked onto that stage under 1,000 lights, the weight of my journey pressing gently against my chest. "Thank you," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "This award isn't just for me. It's for every woman who was told she couldn't, who was made to feel small, who thought her story ended when someone broke her heart. It doesn't end there. It begins there." The room erupted in applause, but my eyes found one face in the crowd. Ethan. I hadn't expected him to be there, yet there he was, sitting quietly near the back, watching. Our eyes met for a brief moment. There was no anger left, no sorrow, just understanding. I gave a small nod, a silent goodbye, then turned back to the microphone. "Pain is a teacher," I said, "and I learned how to create something beautiful from mine." After the ceremony, reporters surrounded me. Flashing lights, microphones, congratulations, it all blurred together. But through the noise, I heard one voice ask, "What would you tell the version of yourself who felt unloved and unseen?" I smiled and said, "I'd tell her that love isn't something you beg for. It's something you become." That quote made headlines the next day, but for me, it wasn't publicity. It was closure. Months later, I took a trip to the countryside, far from the chaos of the city. A quiet retreat surrounded by trees and open sky. I needed space, not to escape, but to breathe. Each morning I'd walk along the lake, sketchbook in hand. The air smelled of pine and rain, and for the first time in years there were no deadlines, no expectations, no noise, just me. One morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, I sketched a dress, simple yet radiant. I called it Freedom, and I realized with tears in my eyes that I had finally designed something that wasn't born from pain. It was born from peace. On the final night of my retreat, I wrote in my journal, the same one I'd started years ago when everything fell apart. I forgive you, Ethan, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free. I forgive myself for staying too long, for loving too hard, for believing too little in me. And I thank the storm, because without it, I would have never learned how to dance in the rain. I closed the book and exhaled deeply. It was done. The circle was complete. A few weeks later, I hosted my next fashion show. The theme was healing. Every design told a story of loss, of rebirth, of empowerment. As the final model walked the runway wearing Freedom, the audience stood, applauding, tears glimmering in their eyes. Backstage, I watched it unfold and whispered, "We did it." And in that whisper was everything. The years of struggle, the nights of doubt, the countless moments I thought I'd never rise again. But I wasn't the woman defined by betrayal anymore. I was the woman who built an empire from its ashes. Later that night, I stood outside the venue, the city lights reflecting in my eyes. I thought of the people who had hurt me, the ones who had doubted me, and I felt no anger, no sadness. Just gratitude, because they had unknowingly given me the greatest gift, myself. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the love you spend years searching for has been inside you all along. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally chose yourself?